The bell above the diner door screamed as she pushed it open, a frantic, desperate sound that cut through the low murmur of the late-night radio and the steady drumming of rain against the glass. She stood there for a moment, hesitating on the worn linoleum, her breath coming in ragged bursts that fogged the cold air. Water dripped from the hem of her dark purple dress, pooling around her feet. Her name was Naomi, she was 25 years old, and she was running out of time. Her eyes, wide with a fear that was sharp and immediate, scanned the handful of occupied booths. A trucker hunched over a plate of fries. Two teenagers whispering over a shared milkshake. And then, her gaze landed on him. He sat alone in the corner booth, the one with the best view of the entire room and the street outside. He was impeccably dressed in a dark suit that seemed to absorb the low, yellow light of the diner, making him a figure of shadow and stillness. A single cup of black coffee sat before him, steam rising in a slow, hypnotic curl. He was Japanese, his features sharp and composed, his posture radiating an unnerving calm that felt alien in this place of hurried meals and transient loneliness. He looked like he owned a world, and had simply chosen to observe the small, wet corner of it for an hour. Naomi took a deep breath, the air tasting of grease and damp wool, and walked towards him. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic prisoner. This was insane. This was a prayer to a god she did not know, in a church she had just entered. She stopped at his table. He did not look up immediately. He finished a deliberate sip of his coffee, placing the cup back on the saucer with a soft, definitive click. Only then did his dark, unreadable eyes lift to meet hers. There was no surprise in them, only a quiet, unnerving assessment. "Please," she whispered, the word raw and broken. "Please, can you help me?" His expression did not change. He simply watched her, his silence a heavy cloak. She glanced over her shoulder, toward the rain-streaked window. Headlights cut through the downpour, slowing as they approached the diner. Two figures were visible inside the car. Her stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. "Please," she said again, her voice gaining a sliver of strength born from pure terror. She leaned closer, her hands gripping the edge of the faux wood table. "I need you to pretend to be my husband for the first time," a flicker of something registered on his face. It was not shock, not yet. It was a deep, profound stillness, as if the world had suddenly stopped turning on its axis, and he was the only one who noticed. He looked from her pleading eyes to the car pulling into the parking lot. The car door opened. What Naomi did not know, could not possibly know, was that the man sitting before her was not just a well-dressed tourist. She had no idea that his name was Kaido Tanaka, and that his calm was not a matter of temperament, but of absolute, undisputed authority in a world she could barely imagine. And outside, a man named Marcus, the very reason for her terror, was getting out of the car, his face set in a mask of grim ownership as he started toward the diner door. "Hello, and welcome. I am so glad you are here for another story. If you enjoy this kind of content, please consider subscribing to the channel. Now, let us get into it." The man, Kaido, continued to hold her gaze for a long, stretched-out second. The silence between them was deeper than the rumble of the passing trucks on the wet highway. Naomi felt her hope beginning to curdle into despair. He was going to say no. Of course he was. He was a stranger, a man of wealth and bearing who had no reason to involve himself in the messy, desperate life of a woman who had just stumbled in from the rain. She could see the refusal forming in the subtle tightening of his jaw. She was about to turn away, to face her fate alone, when the bell above the door shrieked again. Marcus was here. He stood just inside the entrance, shaking water from his leather jacket, his eyes sweeping the room with a predator's casual arrogance. His gaze locked onto Naomi, and a cruel, satisfied smile spread across his face. Beside him, his friend, a lanky man with shifty eyes, grinned. It was in that exact moment, as Marcus took his first step towards her, that Kaido moved. It was not a large movement. He simply shifted in his seat and raised a hand, beckoning her with a slow, deliberate gesture to slide into the booth opposite him. His eyes never left hers, and in their depths, she saw a decision had been made. Trembling, She did as he indicated, sliding onto the cool vinyl seat. The worn fabric of her dress felt heavy and damp against her skin. Kaido then turned his head, just slightly, to acknowledge the approaching men. His posture remained relaxed, but the atmosphere around their table had changed. It had become dense, charged, a pocket of absolute zero in the warm diner. "Naomi, baby," Marcus said, his voice a low, possessive drawl. He stopped beside the table, looming over her. "You didn't really think you could run from me, did you?" "We were just talking." He ignored Kaido completely, as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture. "We're done talking, Marcus," Naomi said, her voice shaking but firm. She stared at the salt shaker on the table, unable to look at him. "I told you to leave me alone," Marcus laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You don't tell me anything. You belong to me. Now, get up. We're leaving." He reached out to grab her arm, but before his fingers could touch her, Kaido spoke. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through the diner's ambient noise like a razor. "She's not going anywhere," Marcus froze, his hand hovering in the air. He finally looked at Kaido, really looked at him, and a sneer twisted his lips. "Who the hell are you?" Kaido picked up his coffee cup, his movements unhurried. He took a sip before answering, his eyes cold and flat. "I am her husband." The lie was delivered with such profound, unshakable certainty that for a second, even Naomi almost believed it. Marcus stared, his face a canvas of disbelief and fury. "Husband? You're lying." "She ain't got no husband." Kaido set his cup down. "Is that a fact?" he asked, his voice dropping even lower. "You seem to know a great deal about my wife's affairs. Perhaps you would like to explain why." The challenge hung in the air, sharp and deadly. Marcus was momentarily stunned into silence. He looked from Kaido's impassive face to Naomi's, searching for a crack in the story. He saw only her genuine fear, which he misinterpreted as fear of him, not of the lie being exposed. He was not a man who thought deeply about things he could not immediately punch or intimidate. A man in a fancy suit was just a man in a fancy suit. "Look, old man," Marcus sneered, recovering his bravado. "I don't know what kind of game you two are playing, but she's coming with me. This is our business." Kaido's gaze was utterly unwavering. "Her business is now my business. And I am telling you to leave." He did not raise his voice. He did not move. His power was in his stillness, in the absolute conviction that his words were not a request, but a statement of fact. The air grew thick with unspoken violence. Brenda, the waitress who had been wiping down the counter, had stopped, her hand frozen mid-swipe, a dishcloth clutched in her fist. The trucker in the nearby booth had lowered his fork. Everyone was watching. Marcus's friend shifted his weight nervously. "Come on, Marcus," he muttered. "Let's just go." But Marcus was driven by ego, a petty tyrant whose authority had been publicly challenged. He couldn't back down now. He jabbed a finger toward Kaido. "You think you're tough? You're nothing. Just some rich fool who doesn't know what he's messing with." Kaido slowly folded his hands on the table. "On the contrary," he said, his voice like silk sliding over steel. "I think it is you who does not understand. This is your only warning. Walk out that door, and do not ever approach my wife again." The word wife was spoken with a quiet finality that left no room for argument. It was a shield and a weapon. Marcus's face flushed a dark, mottled red. His fists clenched at his sides. For a terrifying moment, Naomi was sure he would lash out, that the fragile piece would shatter into a spray of broken glass and violence. But something in Kaido's eyes held him back. It was not a threat of physical force. It was something colder, deeper. It was the calm certainty of a man who knew the outcome of 100 possible futures, and in every single one of them, Marcus lost. Defeated by a stillness he could not comprehend, Marcus finally broke. He let out a frustrated, guttural sound. "This isn't over," he snarled, directing the words at Naomi. "You hear me? This is not over." He turned and stormed out of the diner, his friend scrambling after him. The bell screamed once more, and then they were gone, swallowed by the rain and the night. The diner exhaled. The trucker went back to his fries. Brenda started wiping the counter again, though her eyes kept darting toward their table. Naomi finally let out the breath she had been holding, and a wave of tremors washed over her. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to hide them in her lap. She looked at the stranger across from her, the man who had, for a moment, become her entire world. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling small and utterly inadequate. Kaido simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He signaled to Brenda. "Could we have another coffee, please?" he asked the waitress. "And perhaps some tea for my wife." Brenda brought the drinks over, placing them on the table with a small, encouraging smile for Naomi. The warm ceramic mug felt like an anchor in the storm that was still raging inside her. She wrapped her cold fingers around it, letting the heat seep into her skin. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, the only sounds the clinking of a spoon against porcelain as Kaido added a precise measure of sugar to his coffee and the relentless patter of the rain outside. The diner had become a sanctuary, a small island of light and warmth protected by the quiet, formidable man sitting opposite her. Naomi knew she owed him an explanation. He had stepped into her chaos without question, and she couldn't just leave him with the echoes of that ugly confrontation. "My name is Naomi," she said softly, her voice still trembling slightly. He looked at her, his dark eyes giving nothing away. "Kaido," he replied. His name was as clean and sharp as his suit. "I'm sorry," she continued, looking down into her tea. "I shouldn't have involved you." I was desperate. Marcus." He doesn't take no for an answer. Kaido stirred his coffee, his movements economical and precise. "He is your former lover?" The question was direct, without judgment. Naomi flinched. "Something like that."
"For a little while."
"I ended it weeks ago, but he won't accept it. He thinks he owns me." She clutched her mug tighter. "It's not just me. I have to protect my little brother, Sam."
"He's only 7.
Marcus was starting to show up near his school. "That's why I ran tonight. He cornered me outside my apartment." The confession hung in the air between them. She had revealed her greatest vulnerability, the reason for her fierce, protective terror. She was not just fighting for herself, she was fighting for a child. This Kaido seemed to understand. He stopped stirring his coffee and set the spoon down on the saucer. "This brother," he said, his tone still level. "He is safe now." "Yes," Naomi confirmed, relief washing over her as she pictured him. "He's with my neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She knows. She knows to keep the door locked." She finally found the courage to meet Kaido's gaze directly. "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to do that." For the first time, the severe line of his mouth softened, just a fraction. A man who threatens a woman to feel powerful is not a man at all. He is a child throwing a tantrum. Sometimes, a child needs to be told no. His simple, profound statement of principle resonated deep within her. He saw the situation with a stark, moral clarity that was both startling and immensely comforting. He wasn't judging her for her past with Marcus. He was judging Marcus for his actions. He finished his coffee and placed a few bills on the table, more than enough to cover their drinks. "I will take you home," he stated. It wasn't a question. Naomi hesitated. The thought of getting into a car with another stranger, even one who had just saved her, sent a fresh jolt of caution through her. But then she looked at his face, at the calm, steady intelligence in his eyes, and she knew. She was safer with this dangerous, quiet man than she had been for weeks with Marcus. "Okay," she agreed softly. "Thank you." The car was as immaculate and understatedly powerful as the man who drove it. It was a large, dark sedan, the kind that glides through city streets unnoticed by most, but recognized by a select few. The interior smelled faintly of leather and clean, cold air. The rain streamed down the windows, turning the city lights into long, blurry streaks of color. The silence inside the car was not awkward. It was heavy, filled with the unspoken events of the last hour. Naomi sat in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She directed him to her modest apartment building in a quiet, working-class neighborhood, the streets lined with old brick buildings and trees that dripped onto the pavement. As they drove, her fingers found a familiar shape in the small purse she carried. It was a small wooden bird, no bigger than her thumb, its surface worn smooth from years of being held. She drew it out, its familiar weight a small comfort in her palm. Kaido glanced over, his eyes briefly flicking down to the object in her hand before returning to the road. A keepsake, he asked, his voice a low rumble that was easily heard over the soft hum of the engine. Naomi looked at the bird, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time that night. My brother, Sam, he made it for me, she explained.
He's
a special boy. Very quiet.
But he sees things.
And he makes things. He can take a little piece of wood and just see what's inside it. She ran her thumb over the bird's smooth back. He gave me this and told me it would keep me safe. He calls it my guardian. Kaido was silent for a long moment, his profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. There was a deep stillness in his expression, a hint of some old, carefully buried sadness. To have someone who wishes to protect you, he said, more to himself than to her, is a rare gift. He pulled the car to a smooth stop in front of her building. The rain had eased to a persistent drizzle. For a moment, neither of them moved. The engine idled, a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the drumming of the rain on the roof. He will not bother you again tonight, Kaido said, his voice firm, a promise. But a man like that does not give up easily. Naomi knew he was right. The relief she felt was temporary. Marcus's pride was wounded, and that made him more dangerous than ever. I know, she whispered. I'll be careful. She looked at him, at this stranger who had become her unlikely champion. I don't have any money to pay you for your help. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. This was not about money, he said simply. Go inside. Lock your door. Be with your brother. She opened her mouth to thank him again, but the words felt clumsy and insufficient. Instead, she just nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She clutched the small wooden bird and opened the car door, stepping out into the damp night air. As she walked up the steps to her building, she could feel his eyes on her. She glanced back once and saw the dark sedan still waiting at the curb, its engine a low, protective growl in the quiet street. He did not leave until she had unlocked her front door and was safely inside, the light in her window flicking on. The next 2 days were a strange mixture of tense quiet and gnawing anxiety. Marcus did not show up at her apartment. He did not call, but his absence was a presence in itself, a coiled snake waiting in the shadows. Naomi felt its chill every time she walked Sam to school, her eyes scanning every car, every face on the street. She worked at a local community daycare, a place filled with the bright chaos of children's laughter and finger paints, and even there, in that cheerful, sunlit space, she could not shake the feeling of being watched. On the 3rd day, the snake struck. She was in the middle of reading a story to a circle of 4-year-olds when her director, a kind but harried woman named Mrs. Peterson, called her into the office. Her face was pale and distressed. Naomi, she began, wringing her hands, we received a phone call this morning. A complaint. Naomi's blood ran cold. A complaint? About what? It was a man, Mrs. Peterson said, avoiding her eyes. He said some terrible things. That you were unstable, that you were involved in dangerous activities. He claimed you were a threat to the children. Naomi stared at her, speechless. It was Marcus. Of course, it was Marcus. Unable to control her physically, he was now trying to systematically dismantle her life, starting with the job she loved, the place she felt safe. That's a lie, Naomi said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. His name is Marcus Thorne. He's an ex-boyfriend who's been harassing me. This is his way of getting back at me, Mrs. Peterson sighed, her expression a mixture of pity and professional obligation. I believe you, dear. I do. But the board has a zero-tolerance policy. An accusation like this. We have to investigate. I have to place you on administrative leave, with pay. Until this is sorted out, the words hit her like a physical blow. Leave. She was being sent home, cast out from her sanctuary, because of his poison. But the children, she started, thinking of the little faces who depended on her every day. I know, Mrs. Peterson said, her voice gentle. I'm so sorry, Naomi. Naomi walked out of the daycare in a daze, the children's distant laughter sounding like something from another world. The humiliation was a hot, bitter taste in her mouth. This was what Kaido had warned her about. A man like that does not give up easily. She walked home, the streets of her neighborhood suddenly feeling hostile and alien. When she got to her apartment, she locked the door and leaned against it, sliding down to the floor as tears of frustration finally came. She had protected Sam from the immediate threat, but she had no idea how to fight this insidious poison that was now seeping into every corner of her life. She felt utterly, completely alone. What she did not know was that she was not alone at all. Miles away, in a quiet, minimalist office overlooking the city, Kaido Tanaka was receiving a report from one of his men. The man, dressed in a simple, dark suit, stood respectfully before Kaido's desk. The subject, Marcus Thorne, made a call to the director of the daycare this morning. The man reported, his voice flat and professional. He made several false allegations against Naomi Johnson. Kaido sat behind his large, empty desk, his hands steepled before him. His face was like a mask carved from stone. "And her employment status?" he asked. "She's been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation." Kaido was silent for a long time. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below, a complex web of power and lives he could touch and move like pieces on a board. He had hoped his warning would be sufficient. He had underestimated the petty vindictiveness of a weak man. That had been a mistake. "Find out everything there is to know about Marcus Thorne," Kaido said, his voice dangerously soft. "His employment, his associates, his parole officer. Everything. And find out who sits on the board of that community daycare." The man nodded once. "Hi." As his subordinate left the room, Kaido picked up a single, smooth river stone from his desk, turning it over and over in his palm. The debt he owed was to a ghost, to the memory of a good man who had shown his father kindness on a deserted road years ago. But his actions now, they were no longer just about the debt. They were about the woman who had clutched a small wooden bird and stood her ground, the woman who had asked a monster for help in order to protect a child. The next afternoon, Marcus decided to press his advantage. Convinced he had successfully isolated Naomi, cutting her off from her job and her sense of security, he appeared at the daycare during pickup time. He intended to make a scene, to cement the narrative that she was unstable and associated with trouble, ensuring she could never return. He stood on the sidewalk outside the playground fence, shouting her name, his voice laced with false concern. "Naomi, I just want to talk. People are worried about you." A few parents, arriving to collect their children, stared at him with alarm. The teachers quickly began herding the kids inside. It was exactly the kind of chaos and public humiliation he had envisioned. But his performance was cut short by the quiet arrival of a black sedan. It pulled up to the curb with a silent authority that made people instinctively step aside. Kaido Tanaka got out. He was not dressed in the sharp suit from the diner. Today he wore tailored gray trousers and a cashmere coat, looking less like a mysterious figure of the night and more like a concerned and very wealthy board member. He walked directly toward Marcus, his steps measured and calm. "Mr. Thorne," Kaido said, his voice polite but edged with ice. Marcus turned, his face contorting in a snarl of surprise and anger when he saw who it was. "You again? What do you want?" "I believe we already had this conversation," Kaido said, stopping a few feet from him. "You were instructed to stay away from my wife. She ain't your wife." Marcus spat. "And she ain't here. I'm here to warn these people about the psycho they let around their kids." From inside the daycare, Mrs. Peterson watched from her office window, her hand over her mouth. She had already called the police, but she knew they wouldn't arrive in time to prevent this ugly confrontation. Kaido gave a small, almost pitying sigh. "Your attempts to slander her have been noted. They have also been rendered irrelevant." He took a small step closer, his voice dropping so only Marcus could hear. "I spoke with the chairman of the board this morning. A very reasonable man. Once certain facts were clarified, Naomi's leave has been rescinded. She will be receiving a formal apology. There was also the matter of a generous, anonymous donation to the center's security fund to ensure unwanted individuals can be kept off the premises." Marcus's face went slack with disbelief. This was impossible. How could this man have reached the board?
Who was he?
And then there is your own situation, Kaido continued, his voice becoming even quieter, more personal. Your employer at the shipping docks, a Mr. Moretti. He is an old acquaintance. He was very disappointed to hear that one of his foremen was spending his time harassing women instead of managing cargo manifests, especially a foreman with a prior conviction for assault. It is, I believe, a violation of his parole. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Marcus's world piece by piece. The blood drained from his face, replaced by the waxy pallor of genuine fear. He was not dealing with a rich fool. He was dealing with something else entirely, something with reach and power he couldn't begin to fathom.
Who?
Who are you? Marcus stammered. Kaido's eyes were cold and empty. I am the man who is telling you that your life in this city is over. You will pack your things, you will leave, and you will never return. If I ever hear your name again, in any context, Mr. Moretti's disappointment will be the very least of your concerns. Am I understood? There was no room for negotiation. It was not a threat. It was a weather forecast, predicting a storm that would erase him completely. Marcus, for the first time in his life, felt true, bottomless terror. He nodded dumbly, unable to speak. Good, Kaido said. He turned his back on him, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and walked toward the daycare entrance, where Mrs. Peterson had already unlocked the door, her face a mask of awe and profound relief. Marcus stood frozen on the sidewalk for another moment, a hollowed-out man, before turning and stumbling away. His reign of petty terror ended not with a bang, but with a whisper. Kaido found Naomi in the small, quiet apartment she shared with her brother. He had called Mrs. Peterson to get her address, an act that felt like a necessary intrusion. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, her expression was a mixture of shock, confusion, and a new, fragile kind of hope. She let him in without a word. The apartment was small but meticulously clean. Children's drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A small table was set for two. In the corner of the living room, a little boy with wide, serious eyes sat on the floor, sketching in a notepad.
This was Sam.
He looked up at Kaido, his gaze curious but not fearful. Naomi stood in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. Mrs. Peterson called me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She told me, everything is fixed. She said I can come back to work tomorrow. She told me Marcus was there, and that she trailed off, unable to articulate the sheer scale of what he had done. He will not bother you again, Kaido said.
It was a simple statement of fact.
His eyes went to Sam, who had returned to his drawing, his small hand moving with intense concentration. He was sketching a bird, its wings outstretched in flight. Naomi followed his gaze. Sam, she said softly, this is Mr. Tanaka. He's a friend. Sam looked up again and gave Kaido a small, shy smile before hiding his face behind his notepad. A wave of emotion, thick and overwhelming, rose in Naomi's throat. This man had stepped out of the night and systematically rebuilt the walls of her world, making them stronger than they had ever been before. Why? She asked, the single word holding a universe of questions. Why are you doing all of this for me? For us? Kaido turned his attention from the boy back to her. His face was, as always, a study in composure, but she could see something different in his eyes now. A warmth, a depth of feeling he no longer tried to completely conceal. Come, he said gently. Walk with me. He led her out of the apartment building and to a small, manicured park at the end of the block. The rain had stopped, and the evening air was cool and clean. They walked along the wet path, the sound of their footsteps soft on the pavement. At the diner, Naomi said, breaking the silence, you called me your wife. And then again today to Marcus. I don't understand. Kaido stopped by a wooden bench overlooking a small duck pond. It was the simplest way to claim a right to protect you, he explained. A title he would, however reluctantly, have to respect, but it was more than that, she insisted, looking up at him. Everything you've done, getting my job back, finding out about his parole. That's not something a stranger does. He was silent for a long time, watching the ripples on the surface of the pond. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and resonant, with the weight of the past. "I am not a stranger, Naomi." He turned to face her fully, and in that moment, she felt the entire world shift on its axis. "Your father. His name was Joseph Johnson, was it not?" "He was a mechanic," she nodded, stunned.
Yes.
"He passed away 3 years ago. 20 years ago," Kaito said, his eyes distant. "My father's car broke down on a deserted stretch of highway 100 miles from this city. He was a foreigner, he spoke little English, and he had no one to call. The night was cold. He was sure he would be stuck there for hours, perhaps all night. But a man in a tow truck stopped. That man was your father." He paused, the memory vivid in his mind, a story passed down to him with reverence. "Your father towed the car to his garage, worked for 3 hours to fix a broken fuel line, and then refused to take a single dollar for his labor or the parts. My father insisted, but yours just smiled and said, 'Sometimes a man just needs a little help.' You pass it on. Here is the part of the story nobody saw coming, not even Naomi. The kindness of a simple mechanic on a lonely road had forged a bond of honor, an unpaid debt known in Kaito's world as on. My father never forgot that kindness," Kaito continued. "It was a debt of the soul. Before he died, he charged me with ensuring the man who had helped him and his family would always be watched over. I have known of you and your brother for a very long time."
I was not in that diner by chance, Naomi.
"My people informed me that Marcus Thorne had become a problem. I was there because you were in trouble. I was there to answer my father's promise." Naomi stared at him, her mind reeling. The pieces of the last few days clicked into place, forming a picture so much larger and more profound than she could ever have imagined. The man in the diner, the chance meeting, his inexplicable willingness to help. It was not chance at all. It was destiny, forged 2 decades ago by her father's simple act of decency. A debt of the soul. The words echoed in her thoughts. "My father," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears.
"He was a good man."
"He was always helping people, he was," Kaito agreed, his voice gentle. "The honor of the father passes to the son. I was fulfilling an obligation." She looked at the incredible man standing before her, a man who moved in a world of shadows and power, yet was bound by a simple promise of kindness. But she also saw something else, something that had grown in the space between them over the last few days. The way he looked at her now was not the look of a man fulfilling a duty. It was something more. "Was it just an obligation?" she asked softly, her heart daring to hope. "When you stood up to Marcus? When you made sure Sam and I were safe?" Kaito held her gaze, and for the first time, the last wall of his composure seemed to dissolve, allowing her to see the man behind the mask of control. "The debt brought me to your door, Naomi," he said, his voice imbued with a new, raw honesty. "But watching you, seeing your strength, your courage, the way you care for your brother, that is what made me want to stay. The obligation has been met. My actions now are my own." He took a step closer, and the space between them crackled with an unspoken truth. He reached out and gently took her hand. His touch was warm and firm, a silent promise of steadfastness. "This pretense," he said, looking down at their joined hands.
"Our
marriage. I find I do not wish for it to be a lie." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She looked into his dark, serious eyes and saw her own future reflected there, a future free from fear, a future filled with a quiet, powerful love she had never dreamed possible. "In my world," he continued, "arrangements are made for practical reasons, for alliances, for power. But I do not want an arrangement with you. I am asking you, Naomi Johnson, if you would do me the honor of making our lie the truth. I am asking you to be my wife, not to repay a debt, but because my life would be better with you and your brother in it." It was the most unexpected, most sincere proposal she could ever have imagined. It was not born of whirlwind passion, but of deep, abiding respect. He was not offering her a fairy tale, he was offering her a fortress. He was offering her his protection, his loyalty, and his heart. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy, of overwhelming, bone-deep relief. She thought of her father, and how his one small act of kindness had rippled through time to bring this incredible man to her. She thought of Sam, and the safe, bright future he could now have. And she thought of herself, of the woman who had walked into a diner, terrified and alone, and found not just a savior, but a partner. She squeezed his hand, her answer in her touch before she even spoke the words. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "Yes, Kaido. I will." A slow, genuine smile transformed his face, reaching his eyes and filling them with a light she had never seen before. In that quiet park, as dusk settled over the city, a promise made 20 years ago was finally, beautifully fulfilled. 6 months later, the world was a different color. The muted grays of fear and anxiety had been replaced by the warm, vibrant hues of peace and belonging. Naomi, Kaido, and Sam lived in a house on the edge of the city, a place with large windows that let in the morning sun, and a sprawling backyard that sloped down to a stand of old oak trees. It was a world away from the cramped apartment and the constant sense of dread. Today, the afternoon sun streamed into the living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Sam sat at a large wooden table, his brow furrowed in concentration as he sketched in a high-quality artist's pad, a gift from Kaido. He was enrolled in a special arts academy, a place where his unique, quiet talent was being nurtured by teachers who understood him. He was thriving. Naomi watched him from the doorway, a mug of tea in her hands, her heart full. She was no longer just a survivor, fighting to keep her head above water. She was a wife, a partner, a woman who had found her safe harbor. She wore a simple blue dress, and on her left hand, a modest but beautiful platinum ring shone softly. It was a symbol not of ownership, but of partnership, a circle of protection and respect. On the windowsill, catching the afternoon light, sat the small wooden bird Sam had carved for her. It was no longer a desperate talisman clutched in a fearful hand, but a treasured memento of the journey that had brought them here. Kaido entered the room, moving with his usual quiet grace. He came to stand beside her, his presence a warm, solid comfort at her back. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze following hers to Sam. He no longer looked like a formidable shadow. In the warmth of his own home, he looked like a man at peace, the harsh lines around his eyes softened. "He has a gift," Kaido said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "Like his mother," Naomi replied, smiling. "He has your strength." Their life together was not one of grand, dramatic pronouncements. It was built of small, quiet moments like this, a shared look, a gentle touch, the mutual joy of watching Sam flourish. They were two quiet souls who had found their language in shared stillness and unspoken understanding. "Are you happy, Naomi?" Kaido asked, turning to look at her. His question was direct, his eyes searching hers for the honest truth. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the scent of his cologne and the simple, clean scent of him filling her senses. She thought of the rainy night in the diner, the terror that had propelled her toward a stranger. She had asked him to pretend, to play a part in a desperate fiction. And in doing so, they had found the most profound and unexpected truth of their lives. "More than I ever thought it was possible to be," she answered, her voice soft but certain. He bent his head and kissed her, a tender, lingering kiss that spoke of promises kept and a future unfolding. Sam looked up from his drawing, and seeing them, he gave them the same shy, brilliant smile he had on the day Kaido had first come into their lives. The fear was gone, replaced by the simple, unshakable security of family. Thank you for joining me for this story. I hope it resonated with you. The idea of a promise kept across decades, of a small act of kindness returning in the most unexpected way, is something I find truly powerful. What do you think? Do you believe that the good we put out into the world eventually finds its way back to us? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. It truly helps more than you know. I appreciate you spending your time here with me. See you in the next story.